There we go. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Rebecca Fleury, and I'm the city manager here in Battle Creek. I'm grateful for the turnout and appreciate all of the feedback we're getting on our two candidates for fire chief. A little logistics. In the back of the room are bios for both candidates and a feedback form. Please make sure that we get your feedback on the candidates by Friday at 5. This is being live streamed and recorded, so if we have people out there that have been unable to participate today or be here tonight, that will be made available so that you can view it at a later time. I appreciate all the fire personnel here tonight. I do understand the importance of this position and lots of things being discussed out there, but your feedback is really important. I think we have two good candidates. They're going to talk to you this evening. They've certainly had a full day of Battle Creek today, so thank you very much for welcoming them to stations, for welcoming them here in City Hall. Nobody ran, so Bill's still here, that's good. I hear Jeff's coming, but we'll see. Just a joke. But we do appreciate everything. So we won't be making a decision after tonight. We want to wait for all of that public feedback to come in on Friday. Tonight you're going to hear from both candidates. They're going to do a little bit of brief introduction. You've got a lot of information in their bios. And then they're going to talk about, if they were selected, what would the first year look like at Battle Creek Fire Department. And then we hope after that there'll be plenty of times for Q&A. You can see we're having ASL interpreters for some of our participants tonight. So I tell Bill, and I have to remind myself to talk slow so that we don't get ahead of them. They're usually faster than I am recently. So they'll be switching on and off so that they get breaks. But we want to make sure, from an equitable standpoint, we're getting as much feedback as we possibly can. So I also would like to recognize at least 3 commissioners that I see. I see Commissioner Bunica Herring, I see Commissioner Kathy Zenda-Wilson, and I see Commissioner Sherry Sophia. Really excited to have them here. I know some commissioners could not be here tonight, but will be watching either live streamed or the recording. So it is my pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Bill Beatty. I'm not going to do any introductions because you have it except for his name. And I want to take up any more of his time to talk with you tonight and talk with our community. So Bill, welcome and thank you for your interest in Battle Creek.
Thank you. Good evening. Okay, I don't need to talk too loud into this. Please do. I can be loud enough as it is. Thank you. As the city manager said, I am Bill Beatty, and I'm here to be your next fire chief in Battle Creek. A little bit about me. I am from the Springfield, Illinois area, born and raised there, back there now. 35 years in the fire service and the emergency services. I have 3 children. They're all adults, 1 grandson. My daughter is my youngest. She's getting married in the spring, so pretty tight family. Very happy to share that here. One of the things that I do, one of my activities, is I am a scholastic sports official in Illinois. I officiate several junior high and high school sports, and the reason that I brought that up is because in addition to enjoying the activity and getting out and doing it, because mostly I wasn't good enough to continue in sports past high school, but it gives me an opportunity to be a positive role model for the student athletes, sometimes for their parents and family members, and I think it's a pretty significant role we play, but it also helps with my role in public safety here. So as I said, I've got 35 years in the emergency services. I started out with the Illinois Department of Corrections, my first big boy full-time job. I was correctional officer, promoted to sergeant, and later was promoted to the training academy at the state training academy. Part of my duties during those 6 years, I was on the state tactical team for our institution, and I was also brought in to teach the fire safety portion of the initial TAC training for officers as they were first learning to get on the team. So I've got that experience behind me. I spent 20 years in the military in the Air National Guard. I started at the 131st in St. Louis in security forces. Later, I transferred up to the 183rd in Springfield, Illinois, where I finished out my career when I retired in 2008. I deployed several times during the first Gulf War and the second Gulf War after 9/11. So I've been around the world a time or two, and quite literally and figuratively both on those accounts. I served in higher education. For 12 years, I ran the academic program, the Fire Science Technology program at Lincoln Land Community College in Springfield. The first 7 years, I was also the EMS program coordinator. I had both programs under my name that I had to deal with. A lot of collaboration with the units in our school district. Lincoln Land's got the largest geographic school district in Illinois, and there were over 100 emergency response agencies in our school district. So we had a lot of people to work with, collaborate with, and make sure that our product was good. The students that we were kicking out of our program were workable members to the customers they were going to. And then I get into my service in the fire service and EMS specifically. I started when I was 18, shortly after I turned 18, with the Vernon Fire Department, which is where I'm serving at right now in my hometown. I was the training officer for a few years, later was promoted to captain, and then after I got hired by Springfield Fire, I had to move out and move into the city, so I left that department and spent the next 23 years in Springfield. I was promoted for driver engineer and then later to the rank of captain, which is where I was at when I retired. During my time on Springfield, how am I doing for you? I'm doing good, all right. During my time in Springfield, I served on a hazmat response team for a little over 10 years, was involved in several committees for the department, emergency medical services, apparatus specifications, rules and regulations, where we worked on policies with the city. That was a joint labor management committee, so a fair amount of experience there. And I retired from Springfield at the end of 2019 to become the fire chief in Garden City, Kansas. It's a city of approximately 32,000 people. The department is about half the size as here. It's a non-unionized department, but I had the full responsibilities of the fire chief's job there: labor relations, budget, policy development, policy management. All the same responsibilities that I had to do is what I did out there. I'll talk a little bit about some of the specific things there when I get to another portion of my speech. My education and training, I have a master's degree in public administration from the University of Illinois Springfield. I also have 3 associate degrees, including one in fire science technology from Lincoln Land and one in criminal justice from the Community College of the Air Force, and that went along with my career in security forces. So a fair amount of formal education behind me there. Some other formal education that I have that I like to talk about separate. I am certified as a chief fire officer by the state of Illinois. This is a year-long course. It's not just you take a course for a week or whatever. It's a full year long, and each month between sessions, there's a lot of work and assignments and papers and things like that to do, experiential tasks that you have to complete that are part of getting that. So to me, it was a significant accomplishment because when I got that certification as a chief officer, I'd never had the rank or title of chief. But through my experience in education and other dimensions, the military, working for corrections and things like that, I was able to meet the tasks and get that certification. And that's why I like to bring that up here tonight, is because that was kind of a significant thing for me. I've taken the first 2 years of the Executive Fire Officer program at the National Fire Academy. Unfortunately, our class got caught up in the pandemic a few years ago, and it threw us into a very big holding bucket for about 1.5 years. I'm still trying to figure out with NFA staff on getting back into the program to finish the last 2 years and go on for that, and that's part of my personal development that I'll talk about here in a little bit. And then the last thing that I want to bring up that was kind of a significant accomplishment for someone in the Air Guard, and that is the Air Force's Senior Non-Commissioned Officer Academy. That's a pretty long class that spent a lot of time talking about leadership and developing others as well as yourself. And I think that's significant for a person in my position and to be your chief as well. Leading troops in the military is all about leadership, just as there's leadership in the emergency services in the civilian sector. And I think it's significant to point out that I have that behind me to wave that flag about. As far as my certifications go, I've got a fair amount that I could stand here and list that I don't want to bore everybody with. I didn't make a PowerPoint to throw them all up on the wall, but a couple that I want to talk about that I think are relevant is I'm certified as an incident safety officer, safety and even firefighter mental health are very important to me. I think that's significant to have that certification for this position. I'm certified as an instructor 3, hazmat technician, which is the highest, well, almost the highest level that you can have, as well as hazmat incident command. And I think having those certifications in our career field in positions such as this are important to have for doing that. I'm also certified as an R firefighter with airport certification. We had those responsibilities in Kansas, so I went and got certified for that since my fire department was responsible for the airport. I'm licensed as an EMT intermediate in the state of Illinois. Illinois does licenses for EMS versus certification because technically, as you know, we're practicing medicine under a doctor's care or a doctor's guidance. So I have that, and I've also started working in emergency management over the last year, and I've got more classes than I can count. It seems like every other week I'm sitting in front of the computer for a day and a half to take a class and getting up to speed with those. So I've got a pretty broad amount of education and training and certification there with me. As far as my individual goals for professional development going forward, I am working on my Chief Fire Officer designation application package. My deadline for that is coming up in about 2.5 weeks, so I will be getting that submitted and supposed to know by the end of the year, should be before Christmas, on getting that as well. And then continuing education in fire science, in the fire services, and emergency management, as well as EMS. And there's some other things that I think for a person in position at this level, as I serve as the deputy chief in Divernon, even with our small volunteer department, a class that I found, it's about a 14 or 16-hour class through the University of South Florida, and it's a certificate that human resources professionals are recommending at these levels, and it's on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think it's important for my development, as well as serving in this position as your chief, to continue taking classes such as that, not just about the fire service or EMS and so on. So that's my plan for my personal development. As I started to say a minute ago, still trying to figure out how the National Fire Academy with the executive fire officer is going to play out. The pandemic wreaked havoc with all kinds of stuff, as all of you know, and it's no different in our training world as well. So I'm still trying to figure that one out. As far as philosophies and theories, things that are important to me, I consider myself a servant leader, which is basically putting other people in position to succeed. It's developing others. And that's how I view my position, whether I am the chief of the department, whether I'm a company officer, whether I'm working with a private organization that I'm a member of. I believe that it's important to develop others and put others in position to succeed. As others are put into position to succeed, that only makes our whole organization better and makes us able to do our jobs better. So that's pretty important to me. Accountability is big with me. Own your mistakes. I mentioned this in our interview last week for some of you who were able to sit in on that. Sometimes you're wrong, and it's okay to be wrong. The issue is, or the thing is what you do with that. How do you grow from it? How do you learn from it and improve going forward? So accountability is a big thing, which leads into honesty, it leads into ethics, and it leads into integrity. And those are all principles that I hold quite highly in my position, regardless of what level I'm at. It's just as a leader, that's how I view things we should be. Inclusion is also very important to me. One thing that I learned in Garden City was the firefighters hadn't been really truly engaged in their department, in their futures, in their careers. So I implemented some committees that were made up of members from all ranks through all parts of the fire department. And I think it's important to have that inclusion at all levels instead of being selective about who you include, who you do things with. It's better to prepare as many people as possible going forward. And then collaboration. We can't do anything, especially in today's world, in the emergency services, without collaboration. We have to work with others. We depend on the police department. We depend on the street department. the water department to make sure that their water system is good enough for us to be able to do our jobs on those scenes. So we have to have collaboration, working with other departments. It's something I've done throughout my entire career. When I was still in the military, I was the military security liaison for the local air show that was run by the civilian side of the airport. So I worked with not only the air crews, but I also worked with the civilian law enforcement, the security volunteers for the air show, and other entities like that for making sure we got the job done. Recently, I initiated and led, and it's about done. It's supposed to go live the 1st of October, but 9 area fire departments, an accountability project is what I called it. We had no way of going on scenes and knowing who was there and where they were doing, what they were doing and where they were located. We discovered this in mutual aid situations, which, as you may or may not know, across the country, having enough people to conduct these emergency scenes safely and efficiently is a challenge these days, especially in small rural volunteer departments. So I got with the 9 departments that would show up with us on initial and maybe second alarm for calls. And we've created a policy that each department is going to implement in their department. So no matter whose town or district that we're going to, we all know what the policy and procedure is to make sure that all those firefighters go home at the end of that incident. So that's an example, but that collaboration is important with everything. As I mentioned, working with the water department, working with public works, working with the police department, our dispatchers, the state police, all those people that we touch. It's very important to have those relationships developed, grow them, because it's going to make all of us be able to do our jobs better as we go along. Excuse me. The last thing that I could have brought up under my experience that I kind of left for a separate is labor relations. That's kind of near and dear to my heart. My entire 23 years in Springfield, I served with AFF Local 37. I spent about 12 years of that on the executive board, either as a shift steward or the union secretary. During my 23 years, I was involved in every single contract negotiations, even during the 10 or 11 years in the middle that I was not on the committee. I told somebody in a meeting today, somewhere in the process, I became the old guy that had that institutional knowledge of why did we negotiate this 8 years ago. You know, I was the guy that remembered why or had the notes as to why. So I found myself involved in all 6 contract negotiations during my 23 years. But my experience has been gained from both sides of that labor management relationship. In the military, I had non-military unionized state employees under my command that worked for us on the base. At the college, in the program that I ran, our adjunct faculty are unionized. They have a collective bargaining agreement. So in my work, it was imperative that I made sure that we understood what that collective bargaining agreement was, as well as we implemented any policies or programs within our academic programs to not violate that or work on suggested changes if we needed to do that. And I think that that's important to talk about in this setting. This is obviously a unionized fire department. I think a good working relationship, we may not always agree, but having a good working relationship to solve issues, to attack problems, to head problems off, I think it's important and it's imperative for us to be able to serve the community that we're here to serve. I think those are important things to bring up. So why am I here? What brought me to Battle Creek? I'm not one that just applies for every single job that comes open. Technically right now I am a retired firefighter. I'm living the gravy train easy life. This position interests me. This city interested me. And that's how I viewed things. I looked at the city itself. A lot of history here. It seems like a wonderful area. Everything I've been able to find out about it, that was a draw for me. It's worthy of me moving away from my family to go back to work to do, because I like what I found here. Today and yesterday, while I was kind of riding around looking at stuff, has helped solidify that for me. The other thing I looked at was I believe the city itself is well run. The commission, the city manager, the local stakeholders that are very involved in what goes on here seem to be actively engaged and genuinely looking to make the city move forward, the city itself. And that can't be anything but good in the long run for the fire department. So those were two big draws for me. And then I looked at the fire department itself. For me personally, the size of the fire department, it's right around 70 now, whether that's 85, whether that's 65. That's a good size for me. I like that size. It's manageable. I can get to know everybody personally, not just recognize names and faces. It'll take me a minute to get that far, but I'll get there eventually. But the future outlook for the fire department is promising to me. I see that growth. I see the desire. I see everything I've been able to find through my research. I saw a group of firefighters that are very dedicated to their craft. They're also very dedicated to each other, and they're dedicated to this city. And for me, that's a draw. I want to work in an organization like that. I compared and contrasted what I know from the emergency services in Illinois to what I've been able to find out about Michigan. The certification processes are similar. Illinois can be a bit stubborn about things at times, but the processes themselves are similar. The way they're governed, the way they're managed are similar. It's not something that's going to be totally foreign to me. It's going to be something that I can step into and not have to learn every single thing. I'm only going to have to learn certain things. Mutual aid, working with other departments, it's something that I'm familiar with. It's something that I've done my entire career in the emergency services, even with the military. You know, I was Air Force, but we worked with the Army a lot, especially when we were deployed overseas. There's a lot of working together there, and I see that is important for service delivery today and going forward. So I saw those opportunities here. I compared emergency management. That is a big difference between Michigan and Illinois. In Michigan, best I can tell, emergency management pretty much falls under law enforcement from the state level on down, but it's still a whole community approach. In Illinois, most of emergency management, it's either a standalone organization, whether it's city, county, or the state has its own, or it's under the arm of a fire department. But again, it's the whole community approach. Everybody has a role to play. Public Works, the street department, the water department, the solid waste department, on and on and on. So I compared these things, and I talked about some of my things, over the last 20 minutes or so. I believe my skills, my knowledge, and my experience fits with the position here, with the direction of the fire department. It was communicated to us throughout the hiring process, the advertisement and such, some of the skills and attributes that you're looking for in a new leader, and I believe that mine fill those. As I mentioned, collaboration is big and important to me. Accountability, yourselves, the people that you work with, that work for you and are under you, those are all important to me. Those were things that were communicated that Battle Creek is looking for. So I think that my skill set, my education, my background is a fit for what Battle Creek is looking for and for be able to take Battle Creek going forward. So with that, that's kind of a synopsis of me. I know I'm well ahead of my hour, but I talk too fast and I don't really like talking about myself very often. So that's an introduction to me, and I would like to take any questions anyone might have. Yes, sir.
I know you spoke to diversity, equity, and inclusion in South Florida. I know you spoke to the program in South Florida, diversity, equity, inclusion. The 14-hour program. Is that a program you've been through? Can you speak more to that, to the diversity piece?
No, I have not found or been through that actual course yet. It's broken down into 2-hour blocks. They're all recorded from their seminars on campus, so I don't have to go to, unfortunately, I don't get to go to Florida for 14 hours and hang out in the sun. But this is something I actually just learned about 3 weeks ago. So figuring out when I'm going to schedule that. The reason I brought that one up specifically is I feel that that is an important issue for a person in my position as the fire chief, really as any department head, but definitely in public safety, because we reach so many places, we touch so many people. That's something that I view as very important, and I think that it's something that our leadership should have training and education in that can filter down through the department, and again, it helps us do our jobs better for our community. So I haven't taken the class yet to answer your question, but I'm going to take this class, and it's also an example of things that I think that a leader's professional development should include. Hmm?
What will you be doing for the deaf community? How will you, for Michigan, how will you make it more accessible for the deaf with lights and before, I was trying to get like an alarm. They gave me an alarm with an electric wire, but the firemen could not get into our house, and so people came for it.
So she had an incident that we had trouble getting access to her.
Right. I couldn't get my fire alarm with a wire. I could not get a fire alarm. They can't just install them. You have to hire an electrician to install this. You have to hire the company to come to the house, and I have to pay for that service. So why do I have to pay for that service when I know that I'm deaf and that's what I need? I need help with the service as well as the fire alarm. But why do we have to hire someone like the electric company to supply us with this service? Like for the deaf flash and for safety measures in the deaf community, for the deaf community here in Battle Creek, it's a big struggle. So I'm hoping for the future you can help with the deaf community and give them more access, and they can sleep at night and know that, and they're not thinking about their safety. They know they can sleep and they can rest at night, and they know they're safe. That's all I got.
That's something that we can work on through the community development program, or community relations office rather, that we can look at options, different programs that may be available out there for installation and things like that for you to be able to gain access for that. That's something that I would have to learn a little bit more about as we move forward.
Okay, but I'm sure that other hearing people have had problems, but because we're deaf, we have different problems. We need the smoke detectors that have the flash. We can't hear the beeping. It's very, very important that we have the ones that have the flashes on them, because our eyes are doing the detecting, not our ears. So when we see the flash, we know there's a fire, and that's very important for the deaf community. Hearing people can hear, and it's not a problem. They can hear the fire, the smoke alarms, but because we're deaf, we can't hear them.
Most definitely, and
Yeah, we have to ask people for help, and they say, we will, but when? When are these people going to come and set up these and hardwire these for us? It keeps happening.
And that's something that we'll have to explore, the different options that may be out there, agencies or programs that we can partner with to help get that done. It's just something that we'll have to explore and see what kind of details we can come up with. I can't say I'll come in because you don't want me to do your electrical work for sure. So we can definitely explore the possibilities.
Bill, I can take a little bit of that too, if you don't mind. So, when Bill talked about working interdepartmentally in the city, that is what we're talking about. So if we have a barrier of smoke detectors for the deaf, then we can work together with our building department as well as the fire department to make sure that it is wired correctly, done by a licensed electrician, and there are some programs that the city has that may be able to ease that financial burden for the installation. So please know we'll get information from you two ladies and connect you with the right people.
Write that down.
As a former fire inspector, I can also say we have a Knox box program, which the guy's probably laughing at me now, but anyway, that may be something to consider in the future also in addition to because that would help the firefighters gain access where they may not have that, but the firefighters could get into the home on a very secure basis as well.
Thank you.
Battle Creek's in desperate need of new fire stations. In your opinion, what is the most critical timestamp for response in a city with Battle Creek's historically provided staffing?
So we've got a couple different questions there. The first one is about the buildings themselves.
No, that's not a question. I mean, you need
okay.
new stations.
There's definitely some age issues with the stations for sure.
Where you put them is a different thing.
Where you put them, something that I talked about talking to senior staff earlier today and through some of our stops today, talked a little bit about. But I think we have to, in today's age, we have to be data driven. We have to look at where our calls are, where are our hangups with railroad tracks, with traffic tie-ups that are usual, getting around the high schools, things like that. So having that data of we know where the calls are, how long does it take us to get there? Once we analyze that, then we start figuring out ways to address that. Part of that will be the aging stations themselves, as we look at, as any fire chief, as any fire department would look at updating their facilities. That's the opportunity to update how you adjust your responses and where you're responding from, if you need to move stations, if you need to reposition apparatus where they're assigned to put the right people in the right place.
Okay, that's great. I agree with you on that. With Battle Creek having a staffing of 3 on a rig right now, what is the most important response time to consider in those? The first due engine or the second due?
I'm always going to stick with probably the first.
Okay,
because
they can't conduct fire operations until
that's
the
not
second.
that's actually not true. They can't go inside technically, but they can still conduct fire operations. Shifts in fire attack over the last 10, 12, 15 years has kind of shifted towards pull up, blast water into the window real quick while you're getting position and you're waiting for that second due rig to get there.
Okay, wouldn't that just push the fire throughout the structure into areas that weren't already burned?
Not as much as they taught in the 1980s and the 1990s. The theories on fire attack, fire advancement, fire behavior have shifted quite a bit. I know in my 35 years, it's way different than it was back then. So it's all stuff that you have to analyze to be able to do. But if there is a life safety issue, that first unit can act.
Right.
So that's why I say, in my mind, that first unit is still critical to the beginning and the setup of that incident's operations and what's going to happen. They set the stage for everything that's going to happen over the next hour or so.
Okay. Battle Creek is at a historic low for the number of firefighters it has on duty now. Even before they had more firefighters on duty before they merged with Battle Creek Township, which drastically increased the land area of Battle Creek. Are you opposed to changing the staffing structure of the Battle Creek Fire Department?
I'm not opposed to anything. I would say everything needs evaluated, everything needs looked at, but you have to analyze all of this stuff. Would it be better to only have 5 engines instead of 6, or whatever the case may be? Should we run 2 trucks instead of 1 and do the 5 engines that way? All these things you need to look at are part of analyzing the data that you collect historically over the years. You know that this section of town is one of our highest response, where we go to a lot. So we can take that and then we can analyze what we use to go to those incidents, whatever the incident might be, and we start making those adjustments. If that includes personnel, one of the things that I learned today, that even though Station 4 has been closed for a few months, or 4 months, whatever it's been, the same number of people are still on duty. They've been able to somewhat enjoy having a little bit of shift of how people are assigned on a daily basis, and that's changed their response model in the process. And I got the feeling, nobody really said that it's better now or it's worse now, but I got the feeling that having that shift in the response model has improved things for them as they've went on over the last several months. So to get back to answering your question, the important thing is to evaluate and see where we need to go, where we need to be, and what we need to have to be able to do it.
Okay, thank you. And as fire chief, do you feel it's your duty to tell the city manager what they want to hear or what they need to hear?
Yes, a very firm yes. I don't think it's any department head's responsibility to just blatantly appease or oppose the city manager. But I do think it's important to be honest and truthful and thorough. Facts. We don't make stuff up. You know, we tell you if we're having an issue with something, we need to talk about that issue, not something around the side of it that kind of means that issue. We need to talk about that issue. And I would hope that the city manager would view the same thing. That she'd come to me and say, hey, we're having this problem that keeps cropping up out of the fire department. What do we need to do to address it? And we go on from there.
Okay, very good. One last question, I won't take more time up. Are you in favor of public safety departments?
Depends on the structure. I don't have that much experience with them, but across the United States, in my 35 years of doing various things, I've seen different models of public safety departments. You see a lot of airports that they're pretty much police officers all the time. If there's an in-flight emergency, one of them that's on duty runs and gets the fire truck, and responds to the scene. I've seen other models where this month you're a police officer, you get your week or whatever off, and then you come back and for the next 6 weeks, you're working every third day in a fire station. I've seen the other models of you're a police officer, there might be one firefighter there to bring an apparatus to a scene, and the police officers in that particular sector are going to show up, and then they're going to change hats, literally and figuratively, and respond to that scene. And in all honesty, that particular model, no, I'm not in favor of. I do think that there needs to be specialists. I say specialists. I think that the agencies need to specialize in their strengths. I think they have purposes to serve, and I think you're better off when you have people that are trained in that frame. I think it's a better product for the city, for the community and the citizens, that firefighters are firefighters, that the police officers are police officers. Thank you, sir. Yes, sir.
So just to address one of your statements, the response is, although Station 4 is closed, which is a necessary evil, it's not better. So just to clear that up.
Okay.
If you haven't heard it, it's not better. Moving forward. My question, though, is you spoke to leadership and leadership style, and you spoke as to being an assertive leader. Can you speak more to your leadership style as it affects the rank and file?
More about my leadership style are kind of some of the things I talked about. That's that inclusion I can't expect to include you in a procedure or a process within the fire department if we haven't trained you, if we haven't given you the tools that you need to succeed. So inclusion's important, but there's the other side of that, and that's putting you in position to succeed with whatever we're including each other in. And I think that kind of sums up. It's to a certain extent, it's kind of hard to describe. It's more of a way of being. You know, I can stand up here for a week and tell you how much that I'm going to include and train and do this, but that's only a small component of it, in my opinion. That inclusion, being a servant leader, things like that, it's as much of a mindset on my part as it is anything, as a part of anything concrete step that I can take. I'm going to show you that I want you involved, that I want to hear your opinion, that I value your opinion, not just hear it. I can say that, but until I do it, it doesn't mean a whole lot. But I can guarantee you that that's my intent, that's my goal, and that's how I like to be. It wasn't really talked about, but like in our guard unit, there were only about 4 of us higher level NCOs that the troops wanted to deploy with because they knew they were going to be taken care of. That's not saying that the others weren't competent and couldn't do their jobs, but they knew with the 3 or 4 of us that their safety and their well-being, as well as their job, they were going to be looked after. And getting somebody to come in here and tell you the same story about me, I don't know if anybody would, but that was just one of those things that's how it went with our unit, with the young kids and the troops. So, does that answer your question? Or did I dance around it way too far?
No.
Okay.
In your tenure with the Air Force, were you privy to the total quality management training?
That was kind of coming in as I was starting to get out the TQM stuff. They didn't really filter down to us in the Guard, per se. It was starting to come down the pipeline, with the actual TQM training. I'm familiar with it, but I was gone before they plugged us through the actual implementation, and it was more of a concept that was talked about versus an action that was put into play for us. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, welcome to Battle Creek.
Thank you.
I am curious what you foresee as the biggest challenge based on what you've seen here so far.
Yes, most definitely. I think the biggest challenge, and this is something, because I still have a few more minutes of things to talk about, I wanted to kind of break up and do some questions. But part of that first year here and the evaluations and things like that, there's a lot of things that need to be looked at, but there's also a lot of programs that may or may not have been started, that maybe they stopped, maybe they were left hanging, whatever. Things that I still need to learn about for here. But I think getting through those, as much as anything, is probably going to be one of the biggest. We know that the age of the stations and the locations of some of the stations is a thing. Those aren't free and they're not cheap. We're an expensive date for sure. I don't see it so much as a challenge, but it's going to be a challenge as prioritizing the things that need to be addressed first. One, we're not going to change everything overnight, or fix or address or talk about. We're going to recognize a lot of things, but we're not going to do all of it overnight. It's going to take time. So I think the biggest challenge, to directly answer your question, will be prioritizing which directions we need to go first. Okay, well, with that, I'll real quickly, because I know we're getting, surprisingly, I haven't talked so fast that I've ran out of time yet. And I'm very surprised at that, by the way. The first year on the job, how I foresee it going after I'm selected as your chief, a lot of it's already started. I'm going to call it pre-employment reconnaissance, if you will. I understand what the fire department's vision is, what the mission is. I get it. I know what the city's strategic goals are, how they're tied to the priority-based budgeting system that was put in, six years ago, I think. I understand what the city, what the community is expecting of the city out of that. Safety is one of them. That comes back to us and the police department and other agencies involved. So I've read those. I understand those. It's things that I'm thinking about. And after today, I have a lot more information to draw from to be able to help start formulating those plans. I've read the 2 collective bargaining agreements that are directly affect fire department personnel. I've read those. It's, I have that knowledge, that information that I'm already looking at. But this is an ongoing process of preparation, of review, of planning. You don't just pick a date and say, okay, for day 1 through 21, I'm going to plan this. And then day 22 through 35 or whatever, we're going to do this. It's an ebb and flow type of thing. A lot of listening, a lot of taking notes. I took quite a few notes today, or actually after I got in position between some of our meetings, I was able to sit down and write down a whole bunch of stuff that I had heard and learned from the previous wherever we had been. So I've done that. One of the big things that's important once I take over or whatever is continuity of operations. There's not been a chief here since, I believe, April. And to the citizens here, your fire department stepped up. They have taken the reins and driven onward and forward. And I see that continuing as I come in and get settled in and start moving forward. But I think that's important to recognize that continuity of operations has been going on. And they've taken care of that business. So, being visible will be something that's very important for me at the beginning, all the time, but definitely at the beginning. Visible and attainable, accessible, whatever you want to call it. Get out in the community. That's one of the downfalls I had in Garden City was right after I started, the pandemic hit. I couldn't get out to the community groups because they couldn't meet either. I couldn't be out in the community. I did most of my meeting with the public walking through the grocery store or Walmart and learning, hey, what do you guys think of your fire department? How are we doing our jobs for you and things like that. That was my avenue to be able to do that. Even, the restaurants were shut down for however long. I'm one that I like to eat out a lot, so that's an avenue for me to connect with people in the public to learn about, hey, what do you think about your fire department? Have you had any interaction with them? Things like that. So that's something that's important to me. That's something that you'll see me doing a lot. Communicating my message, my values, and I talked about those earlier, the things that are important to me as far as accountability and the integrity and things like that. My expectations, I expect honesty and openness. If I have a harebrained idea, because sometimes I do that, I hope that somebody's going to say, Chief, you don't want to, that's not going to work here. That was tried 8 years ago. This is why it failed. This is why it won't work today. Cool. I want that. I expect that. And that's those expectations that I'll be expressing to those that I'm around and work with. In the first 30 to 60 days, one of the biggest things that I will do, and luckily we're a small enough fire department that I can do this, and that is I'm going to meet with all 70 personnel of the fire department individually. It may take me a couple days to do, and I'll need some help coordinating that, but it's going to be a little 10, 15, 20-minute, hey, how you doing? Tell me about your family. Are you from this area? Did you grow up here? Did you play high school football? Did you play volleyball? Whatever the case may be. It's just a quick, I'm human. Yes, I'm your new chief, but I'm human. I'm still just a guy that's here to work with you and make sure that we're all in the right place to continue serving our public. So those are going to happen. And early on in the process, meeting with the department staff, what's considered the department staff will take place very early on, as well as with the city manager, finance department, human resources, and probably fleet services. Those meetings will have to take place earlier because those are probably the most direct items or places that we touch with that we need to have that interaction with. During that first 30 to 60 days, there'll also be meetings with the police department, police chief, with the dispatch folks, meeting with labor. That will probably be sooner than later as well. That will be the intent. It would be for the early on in the process. Again, meet with fleet, the schools. I think it's important for the fire department to have a good relation with the school district, at least their upper level. But if we get into the leadership and administration at the individual school buildings, that's not a bad thing to have. And then as well with the city's executive team. And these were not in any particular order. I didn't intentionally leave the mayor and the council members last. That's just the way that it was coming down when I typed this up. But meeting with the individual members of the city council, the mayor, again, I talked about meeting with the city manager. I think those things are going to be important. I'll begin an internal review of pretty much everything. Our facilities, our apparatus, our services and the way we deliver them, how we deliver them, our staffing levels, department policies, all those things. And again, as I talked about a little while ago, that's not going to happen overnight. This is an ongoing process. I foresee a committee that would be made that is a rules and regulations committee, and it will deal with department policies, and it will be a joint labor management committee. I think it's important to have that buy-in from both sides as that goes forward. That's something that we had in Springfield. The union met with the city staff. Every other month we took turns who was buying lunch. But we would meet, probably tell some war stories about a crazy call or a bad fire we had, but we also talked about issues. You know, the chief would tell us, say, hey, we keep running into this issue, we need to talk about this. And we had that common place where we could meet together and talk about stuff and hopefully address it before it became an actual problem. So things like that are things that will be getting looked at very early on. And then within that first 100 days and from there and beyond, because again, this is not an overnight process. It's an ongoing process as well as hopefully in that first year, but meetings with key stakeholders. And again, this is in no order. The sheriff, the other department heads, which some of I will have met with by then, emergency management, medical, all levels of the medical that we work with. That would include the hospital that oversees, you know, our resource hospital and things like that. Our mutual aid departments, state and local law enforcement, those are all people that I'm going to need to talk to. And then my plan is around that 100-day mark, I'm going to have a progress report for the city manager. You know, we're going to have an initial meeting right before or right after I start, and we're going to figure out some parameters. And then after 100 days-ish, whether that's 98 or 112, I don't know yet. But after that first 3 months or so, we're going to have a progress report and talk about things that I've learned, talks about observations that I've made. And I think it's important to have, aside from the regular meetings and things that we're going to meet and talk about, this specific setup on my first part of my tenure, I think would be important to talk about. Strategic planning is very important. I think there are some components in place already. They just need to be put together. I know there's 2 studies that are being done right now that are supposed to be back sometime this fall or later this summer. Things like that, let's look at those and see where they go. That's something that in my first year after that first 100 days, I will look to address. Any projects that have been delayed, I know I talked about those earlier. I know ISO was delayed a couple years ago. but an ISO likes to come in every 5 years and do their reevaluation. So that's something that we'll need to look at within the next year as we plan going forward. And then those unfinished initiatives that I talked about would be the other thing. So with all that said, I think I've given you a pretty good intro to me and my background, how I see the beginning of my tenure going. I've already answered a few questions. Are there any other questions that I can answer for anybody tonight? All right, with that, we have one, a late question in the end.
With the shortage of EMS out there nowadays, how do you feel about like the fire department advancing to ALS level from MFR level, advancing to like the paramedic level versus where we're at right now?
I think my first blush answer, did everybody hear his question? My thoughts on the fire department going up to the advanced life support level from the first responder level that we're at now. I think my first blush answer with that is we need to be the basic level first. We need to step to there, analyze that, figure out what that means for us, how that affects us, how we affect the EMS system, assisting the ambulance, life care, and so on and so forth. I think you need to, it's the proverbial crawl before you walk type of thing. I think we need to move up to that level. If that's what we think we need to do, we go to that level, we sustain that, we figure out where that puts us, and then we make plans to look at going any further from that down the road. That's actually something that an initiative that I had started in Garden City because it was a similar situation. I've told a few people today, a fourth of our calls were car accidents. This was a 1,300 square mile county where we're the only fire department in the entire county. We had places that we responded to that were 54 miles away, one way. And a lot of times we got there before the ambulance did, yet we were first responders. So we're cutting up cars and dealing with people in these cars as first responders sometimes with no other help. So we need to crawl before we walk. If that's what we think that needs to be done for the service for our community, then we take that step, we analyze, we prepare, and we go on from there. That's my thoughts on that.
We got one more.
I know you talked about meeting with a lot of individuals in a lot of spaces, which sound like a lot of partnerships with whether it be the schools or wherever that's at. What's your thoughts on making partnerships true partnerships, which means we both have needs and we both are getting both of our needs met, not only the members that you're meeting with, but as well as the fire department on our side, so that those needs are equally shared in a true partnership form. What's your thoughts on that?
I think it's not a true partnership if both sides' needs are not being at least recognized, thought about, and planned for. I don't know if that's feeding back or not. I don't think it's a true relationship if you don't consider both sides of that. So you have to have that collaboration, and if I'm going to approach the school about a program, I'm not going to have a crazy idea and jump in my car and go over and talk to the superintendent about it. I'm going to talk to us first and say, hey, I had this thought. Have we ever done anything like this if we're not doing it now? Or what do we do now? And then we can take that information and go to them and say, hey, we have this. This is what we do. This is what we're thinking. How does that affect you? If we don't have that back and forth in that relationship where we're working on both sides of it, we're not going to get anywhere. It's fruitless to even attempt if you're not going to look at both sides of it. And that's pretty much with everything, in my opinion.
One more. Did you start?
One more.
Sorry. 30 years ago, the Battle Creek Fire Department initiated a program to increase the diversity of the workforce. And the current people that have been hired under that program, a lot of them have been retiring. And there has not been any program put in place to continue the recruitment of a diverse population in the fire department. How would you address that?
I think one of the first things would be to look at how we recruit. And this, when I met with senior staff earlier today. It was the police chief and a couple other department heads were in this meeting. And that was something that I talked about. We need to look at how we recruit first. Because if we've got some goofy recruiting practices, which ties into any plans or programs for diversity, if our recruiting's in a bucket in the closet, well, we need to start somewhere. So we need to analyze what we do, then we need to analyze where we need to get, where we want to go. I will want to see people in our profession that want to be here. And I'm going to go after every single person that I can get, regardless of who they are. But part of that is also developing those relationships. The example that I gave this afternoon, and I spent 12 years working in higher education, but when we send our Springfield Fire Department recruiters to a college job fair, we're too late. That person's done past us. They're already 2, 3, 4 years into their education in biochemistry, or if they want to be a history teacher or whatever the case may be. They're already past us. We need to be talking to the kids that are 13, 14, 15 years old and say, hey, you even started thinking about your life later on down the road, what you want to be when you grow up. I had it easy. The TV show Emergency came out. I was set. I was like 5 or 6 years old. So I was good from the time I was a little kid. I knew where I was going to be. But we need to analyze all of that on how we recruit, where we recruit, the things that we do. It's not just a matter of putting a diversity hiring plan in place. There's a lot of other pieces and parts, and we have to analyze what we're doing in order to be able to get us to that place. That's how I see that. Does that make sense? Or did I just talk in another big circle? I'm good at that. All right. Well, with that, I do thank you. Sorry, one last thing. I know I mentioned it. I started to mention it earlier. I'm very thankful to see all of you here. I mentioned the phrase whole community. It's a phrase that's prevalent in emergency management, but seeing whole community involvement in this selection process is awesome. You don't always see that when they're looking to fill executive positions in our career field. And the fact that Battle Creek's done that, it makes me even happier that I even applied. It solidifies, and I told the police chief this afternoon, it solidifies what I thought I was going to find here about my desire to want to be the chief here. So thank you all for being here, and thank you for allowing me to be here. Manager?
Thank you all very much. We're just going to have a little bit of a break before we bring the next candidate in, just from a logistical perspective. Please get yourself some snacks, and we'll start within 10 minutes. finish your snacks and come on in. I think the one thing that I forgot to mention earlier was that the city did engage GovHR to help us with this search. For any of you that are searching for talent, we know that this is a really difficult time. Steve Frisbee, I see you right there. Trying to fill these roles is difficult. And so it was really important to use someone like GovHR who has the experience in these searches. So the recruiter that was assigned to Battle Creek for our fire chief search spent 30 plus years in the fire service. I don't profess that I know 30 years of fire service, so I appreciated leaning on Tim Sasko, who's our recruiter. Unfortunately, he could not be here tonight and had to head back to the Chicago area, but he was able to talk with battalion chiefs and with Jason and some of his team members and others, even before we had candidates, just talking about what we were looking for in a fire chief, what's the department looking for, what's the city manager looking for, what's the community looking for, and that it's been really helpful, and I've been appreciative of that assistance. You guys all set? Okay, just a second, we'll get the lapel mic on.
In a pocket? Okay. Can we hear? Yeah, that's loud.
All right, it is. We'll adjust the volume if we need to. So I am happy to introduce our second candidate for fire chief tonight, Jeff Vander Weir. Full disclosure, because I've already been asked, is yes, I did work with Jeff at the Kalamazoo Department of Public Safety when I was the financial services manager. So just want to let you know, I do know Jeff, but so do some of you I know as well. So just want to make sure that you know we're open and transparent in this particular process. And with that, same as we asked for the first candidate, Jeff's going to talk a little bit about his background. Then he's going to talk about if he's selected as fire chief, what would the first year look like. So Jeff, it's all yours.
Awesome. Thank you. Good evening. I want to thank city staff, Tim Sasko from GovHR, as well as firefighters from Battle Creek Fire Department that I met earlier today for your hospitality. I'm honored and humbled to be speaking in front of you tonight as a finalist for the next Battle Creek Fire Chief's job. Before I begin my formal presentation, however, I need to address an issue that recently popped up today on social media, in full disclosure. This issue stems from a 2009 incident over 13 years ago in which I was disciplined for a use of force incident as part of my job with the Kalamazoo Department of Public Safety. While not going into all the details, the incident involved a combative subject who was actively resisting arrest, and while I got him into handcuffs, he spit in my face, and as an instinctive reaction, I punched him twice in his face. This incident was investigated by KDPS, and I was eventually suspended for a period of 20 hours. At all times, I was truthful and transparent in my actions. I've acknowledged this mistake on my part and have moved on with my career. As a public servant, especially one applying for an executive position such as fire chief, I understand the need of the media to report on the past mistakes of the candidates. While evaluating the weight that this incident 13 years ago should play into the decision to hire me as the next fire chief, I encourage you to evaluate my whole body of work over the last 26 years of service to the public safety community. As you'll hear tonight, since this incident occurred in 2009, I was promoted to the rank of lieutenant and captain by the very same chief that suspended me in 2009. This same chief moved me to the Office of Professional Standards as he had seen a significant amount of growth and learning that I had from this incident and that I had moved on and improved myself. Additionally, I was promoted to assistant chief and then eventually hired by the city of Portage, where I've become the deputy chief. Each time this incident has come up, it's been brought forth to the media, and each time the city of Portage, my boss, who was an assistant chief at KDPS, looked at my complete body of work and moved forward, as I hope that the city of Battle Creek will do. As a deputy chief, I don't dwell too much in the past, but I will learn from it. And I learned from this incident as well, but I do not let it affect who I am, what I stand for, and the accomplishments that I have achieved. During my time here today in Battle Creek, it's clear that there are several needs that need to be addressed. within the fire department, many of which have several years of history behind them. If we are to make improvements to the fire department, it will require all of us to learn from our past, but not to dwell on it. It is my intention to do just that if chosen for the next Battle Creek Fire Chief. If you're willing to give me a chance to tell you about myself, let's dive right into it. They asked us to talk about ourselves. It's not a real easy thing to do for anyone. I'm probably going to take a large part of the time trying to give you the best information I can about my career and how I got to this point. I got 4 different areas I want to cover: my family, my formal education, career experience, and professional development. First, what's most important to me is my family. My wife of 22 years, Julie, is in that middle picture on the left. I have a daughter who I call her, she's technically my stepdaughter, but she's my daughter. I've raised her since age 2. She's 25 years old now and lives in Evanston, Illinois. My oldest son, Bryce, is 20, and he attends the United States Coast Guard Academy, and he's in his 2nd year there. And my youngest son, Jaden, on the right in that upper left photo, is, he's 16, acting like 22, and is a junior this year at Schoolcraft High School. You can see he's in a baseball uniform. I've spent pretty much every summer for the last probably 15 years at Bailey Park for baseball or softball between those 3 kids. That is by far my best accomplishment in my life, hands down. My formal education, after graduating from Three Rivers High School, which is about 30 minutes south of Kalamazoo, I went to Kalamazoo College, which is a liberal arts college in, obviously, Kalamazoo. I played basketball there. I graduated in June of 1994. Like many other kids that come out of a liberal arts school with a degree that you can't do much with, sociology, I didn't really have a good idea of what I wanted to do. So I spent a little bit of time trying to figure that out, and I went down, and I still claim this might be the best job I ever had, but St. Joe County Marine Patrol Deputy, nothing better than a 22-year-old kid that's patrolling lakes on a wave runner all summer long. Eventually, though, I got involved with the reserve program, and that's how I decided to go on to Kalamazoo Valley to their law enforcement and career track and move on into law enforcement, where I was picked up by Kalamazoo Department of Public Safety. Along my way at Kalamazoo, I did go on to get my master's degree in administration in 2012 from Central Michigan. Before I go into any other career highlights, I wanted to touch base on this, especially for the firefighters in the room. I talked to a couple stations about this, but didn't get a chance to talk to every station. Public safety, okay? I understand that with a true fire department, the public safety, the words, the concept, it elicits all different reactions. Elicits fear that they're going to make you change to public safety. It elicits, this guy doesn't know what he's doing because he came from a public safety department. He doesn't do what we do. He never has done what we do. All I can tell you is show you my body of work over the last 26 years, ask you to trust me, ask you to understand that my sole goal for the for the Battle Creek Fire Department is to make things just a little bit better. Okay? Going back to, I'll tell a story, apologize, I think Station 2 already heard this, but coming out of college and not knowing what I wanted to do, when I finally went through the police academy, I was a 23, 24-year-old kid flipping pizzas just to make ends meet. While I was going through the academy, KDPS comes calling, okay? And they're throwing dollar amounts at a kid that is making minimum wage. But then they also say, oh, by the way, we also fight fire and we run EMS calls. And we pay you extra to do that. I'm like, well, that was fine, but I'll take that 10% premium to do both. And so I got hired by KDPS. And the moment I hit the fire academy, my passion for the fire service was ignited, okay? Everything I did in my career was solely aimed, I shouldn't say everything, I tried to do the fire track for everything that I possibly could. Now, if you know KDPS, you understand that promotional-wise, everything when I was going through was geared towards law enforcement, okay? That changed as I started going through. I was the first, as a sergeant, I was the first person to become what was called the Frank 40 role. The firefighters that were in the stations had no supervision to them other than the street sergeants that were out on the street. That changed with the development of the Frank 40 role. I was the first one to bid that role, and my sole job was to ensure that the firefighters in the station had everything they needed. I handled rig maintenance. I handled getting them supplies when they needed it, any disciplinary issues that a normal street sergeant would handle. I had zero police responsibilities, other than I still had the gun on my hip, and if I was near something and had to deal with it or could deal with it, I would. But my focus was going around to 6 stations every day and making sure that the firefighters had what they needed. And I was one of the very few individuals that wanted to do that job at KDPS, and I enjoyed it immensely. That is the passion that I have for this fire service, okay? The next story I'll tell you, and it's one that probably led to me deciding that I'd rather be a fire chief somewhere than a police chief. In 2020, as an assistant chief at Kalamazoo, and as with many police departments around this country, we had a 72-hour period of civil unrest stemming from the George Floyd incident. Rightfully so. Not the civil unrest, but people were upset, okay? That was probably the juncture in my career where I had reached a point where law enforcement for me, I had reached a breaking point, okay? I had to make a decision. I spent, in that 72-hour span, I was able to get 8 hours of sleep at home. In that 8-hour span, I slept 30-minute naps in my office between that and going down to our operations center. We had the National Guard. Many of you know this story. We had buildings that were burned, okay? I tell that story for this. That was miserable. That was a miserable experience. And as a leader, that's tough to get through, and you have to lead the department through that. But the reason why I like fire so much is I was on my way home, and I was exhausted that last night. I hit Westnedge in 94, and the tones go off for a working structure fire on the city's north side. I flip around, you can see the glow in the sky, and I'm like 3 miles away. And then I knew exactly what building they said was on fire. It was a 3-story, 12-apartment, vacant building. By the time I got there, I should back up, by the time the first arriving engine got there, which was stationed about 6 blocks away, that building was fully involved and had started 2 additional houses on fire. The fire was so hot, I had to back up the apparatus that were already there because we would melt the paint. I had to dress in my gear on the other side of the street, and it was still too hot. By the time it was said and done, we burnt 5 houses pretty much to the ground. But in that moment, and it was an arson fire, I mean, it was just huge. We had an entire block on fire. 10 departments were there helping us fight this fire. In that moment, everything on the law enforcement side went away. I was in my moment being in command of that fire. And that's how I knew I wanted to be on the fire side moving forward. Everything I did. So I was able to, and I'll go into this more here later, but I just wanted to address the public safety. All I can do is ask for you to give me an opportunity to let me show you that passion, to let me try to improve some of the conditions that you've been working in, and understand that that is my sole goal. I've had my career, I've gotten to play, I've told some of you today, if I'm going in on a line today, I won't be at work tomorrow because I won't be able to move. I'm too old, okay? But now it's that career's over. Now I'm in it, the executive, because I still love the fire service, and I still want to make this place better, or make Portage better, or wherever I'm at. That's my sole goal. So let's talk about career experience. I just threw this up here so you can see it. KDPS follows the law enforcement ranks, so sergeant, lieutenant, executive lieutenant, captain, assistant chief, chief. So the sergeant rank is typically like your company officer in a true fire department. Lieutenant is a battalion chief. They're the shift commanders. Captain would be a divisional chief running a particular division. So everyone understands that. Some of the things I've been able to accomplish over my career, I'm probably going to date myself here a little bit, but when I was a sergeant in that Frank 40 role, I worked on a new apparatus project. We purchased a 75-foot straight stick single axle along with 2 rescue pumpers, and it was a $1.8 million capital improvement project. I laugh, I say that I'm dating myself. I'm currently working on at Portage a 100-foot aerial platform that is projected to be $1.75 million itself this year. I was in charge of the project in which we had our ISO review. This was 2 ISO reviews ago, in which KDPS moved from a Class 3 to a Class 2 organization. At that particular time, there were only 7% of the fire departments in the country were a Class 2 organization. And it's my understanding Battle Creek's a Class 3 currently. I've been in command of the smallest of house fires to the largest multi-alarm high-rise fires. This is important because I think as a chief, you need to be able to understand how the union's doing on the other side of the table. And so I served on our union board when I was on the supervisors union. I've been on a negotiations team. I've served as a grievance rep. I understand how those processes work. And I don't necessarily I threw this up here, but I have 3 life-saving awards specifically associated with fire and EMS. Moving on to my more recent things. When I was promoted to captain, I was sent to the training division and oversaw our fire academy. Developed a first ever annual training calendar in that division, so we projected out all of our training needs for the year. Nothing frustrates I think firefighters more when they come in and they have their day planned and all of a sudden maybe a training officer says, oh, but we need to do this 3-hour training block today. So I've done that not only in Kalamazoo, but we've also done it in Portage now. I was responsible for maintenance and the build out of the training tower in SimCity. And what I say by build out is there's funds from people renting that facility that are specifically used, then they have to be used for the maintenance of that facility. So we try to enhance that. So we built out SimCity, which is an indoor training facility. Oversaw basically all the development of training for police, fire, and EMS in that role. In 2017, the chief called me up and said, Jeff, I want to move you to professional standards. And I said, anywhere but professional standards. And I wanted to go to operations. I wanted to get back to where I could be in charge of a fire and oversee fire stuff. And he said, no, I think I want you to go there. So I called our deputy chief at the time, Deputy Chief Carrie Ann Thomas. And I said, hey, can we meet for coffee and can you try to explain to me how this is good for my career? Because I really I want to go play. I want to be on the fire side of things. And she said, so we met and we had a good conversation and she talked me into going to professional standards. She said, it will be the best move in your career if you want to advance up to a chief's level. Okay? I did not want to investigate cops or firefighters. I did not want to investigate members of our own department, okay? And because that's what professional standards was viewed as. But that is such a small portion of what I actually did. One of the larger portions was recruiting and hiring. And we had a mandate from the city council, city commission, that we had to be local and diverse. We handled all of our recruiting. How'd we do that? Well, we went to the Northside Ministerial Alliance and held recruiting fairs there to broaden the base. And then through that, we found that due to demographics, due to financial status, many people didn't have access to interviewing skills, resume building. So then we partnered with Workforce Solutions, and they would come into our recruiting event together, and they would provide those services for free throughout our hiring process. All of these small things you try to develop, and all you're doing is you're not lowering your standards, you're trying to broaden your pool and broaden opportunities for those that don't necessarily have the same access to the tools needed to have a job, to build a resume, to know how to interview, to stand up in front of a group such as yourself and be able to talk and get your point across. So that was one of the big areas that we focused on when I was a captain in professional standards. A couple other things there is I had to deal with Citizens Public Safety Review and Appeal Board. They reviewed all of our investigations on citizen complaints and would make a decision as to whether or not the chief made the proper decision in determining whether the officer was at fault or was exonerated. I mention all that stuff because from an executive standpoint, these are all things that a fire chief is going to have to do. They have to know how to investigate. They have to know how to deal with unions. I dealt with unions more in this role of professional standards on the side of management than I ever have. You have to know labor law, and all of that comes with this job. And so when my old boss told me this will be the best thing that will prepare you, she was exactly right. So from there, my chief at the time left, and the deputy chief, Gary Ann Thomas, got promoted to chief. She came to me in January of 2018 and said, I want you to be an assistant chief now. And in addition to all the things that you do for professional standards, I'm going to add to it police accreditation. I want you to build a Kalamazoo Strategic Operations Center, which is nothing more than a big data hub and an intelligence hub. And they did a lot of fire and police statistical data that drove decision making. That center also served as an emergency coordination center. It dual purposed when we built it out, and I was also in charge of our emergency management program for the city of Kalamazoo. And on top of it, I was tasked with we want to do strategic planning. You look at that list and you say, none of those things actually tie into one another, other than maybe the Strategic Operations Center and the ECC. And I say, you're right. I used to joke with my boss and say, I think I'm the assistant chief of the land of misfit toys. Anything that didn't fit neatly under another assistant chief kind of came to me. But it gave me a broader depth of knowledge, a broader depth on how to deal with things as a fire chief, and as an assistant chief. Already mentioned the labor law and labor management stuff, police accreditation efforts. As part of police accreditation efforts, we had to revisit every single one of our policies. I had policies dating back to 1984. They were so out of date. We went through and we partnered with Lexipol. I think I heard something around here, maybe your department uses Lexipol. So we partnered with Lexipol, but I went through and we rewrote pretty much every single policy. And just before I left KDPS, we were awarded police. We are an accredited agency with the state of Michigan. I was involved in budgeting. So KDPS used priority-based budgeting. I think that's used here. It might not be in the same style, but the concepts are the same. You're assigning priorities to different functions that the fire department does and personnel and how many full-time equivalents to each. and how's that relate back to a city master plan, and it drives kind of decision-making with the limited financial dollars of the organization. So I was involved in that. We did have a financial person. He was an assistant chief that did the budget, but all the assistant chiefs and the chief would be in the same room filling out these forms to go over to City Hall. Talked about developing the KSOC, developing the Emergency Coordination Center. So here's one, led cities Kalamazoo's COVID response. So they thought it'd be a good idea to assign the guy that's in charge of emergency management to be the incident commander for all city operations as it relates to COVID. So talk about stepping out of your comfort zone. I was working with election officials trying to determine how we were going to hold an election in person and still maintain 6 feet of distance for everyone. You know, COVID made us all have to be flexible, and everything was changing on a daily basis. And so for about a 6-month period there, that's all I did. And we held meetings with city staff pretty much daily, developed all of our incident action plans for every department in the city, and it had to be coordinated, and that was my job. And then I talked about the 3-year strategic plan, which I have some slides at the end if we still have some time. I'd like to go into. The problem with talking about strategic planning is I could talk to you about it for well over 2 hours probably, and none of you want to be here that late. It is the system that we've implemented. I've now implemented at Portage. It went into effect on July 1st with our fiscal year, and I'll try to hopefully get through this quick enough so I can just show you a few slides on how it works. So then I moved on to Portage, and one of my first set of meetings that I had was with each shift, and my kind of mantra to them was community first. And what I meant by that was I told the battalion chiefs, run your shift. I don't need to be involved in every little detail and every little decision making, okay? I want you to run your shift with this in mind. Every decision you make is based on the community first. And an example I used, I said, you're coming back from a call and you come across a group of teens playing basketball in the street with one of those portable basketball, and I choose basketball because I was a basketball guy, that was my sport. It could be anything, but I'll use basketball. And you want to pull to the side and shoot hoops for 10 minutes with them, as long as someone's monitoring the radio and you're available for emergency call, do it. I got a look of blank stares. You're kidding, right? No. Are you available for emergency calls? Yeah. Okay, so what's the deal? Well, before they wanted us to get the call done and get right back to the station. Okay, it's changing. It's changing. Now, I say that for this reason. Our guys have really latched onto that, okay? The upper left corner right there is a picture from a Facebook post on the Portage Public Safety Facebook page 2 weeks ago, I believe. The guys are coming back from a vehicle crash, and they saw these 2 youth here, and I apologize for the picture being smaller, but who were selling candy and doing lemonade. And the guys just wanted lemonade, and they wanted to have fun with the kids, which is what I asked them to do, okay? But what they don't understand is when they took this photo and put it on Facebook, that is one of my proudest moments in the first 15 months here as being the deputy chief at Portage. And my reasoning is this. Out of all the things we've done, put 2 new rigs in place, finished the completion of a new station, an annual training plan, an annual succession plan for the department, an evaluation process for our new hires. Out of all those things that we've done, this is the most important. And they look at me like I'm crazy. But here's what I see when I see this photo. I see 2 things. One, I see possibly our next 2 Portage firefighters in that picture, those 2 young kids. Local, diverse. Okay? I see, then the second thing I see is what I call we're building a goodwill bank. I had a chief a long time ago tell me that community engagement, community first, is building goodwill and it's a goodwill bank. If you are constantly taking money out of your bank, you're quickly going to be bankrupt. This puts money in the bank. This puts money in the bank, so when we need to go ask for a new station or a new rig, or we want to add personnel, these types of things allow us to go get community support for that. If we constantly are withdrawing from that bank when we need them the most to buy a new rig, buy a new station, they won't be there for us. And that's why I love that picture. So on to Portage, talked about community engagement, implemented strategic planning. I implemented a succession plan. Here's the reason why. In the last 2-3 years, based on union contracts and the way retirement packages are aligned, there is no one in the city of Portage that will take an administrative job. And when I say administrative, I'm talking, I've got a division chief that's a fire marshal, a division chief that's a training officer, and a division chief that's a community risk reduction officer. Okay? No one will take those jobs because if they do, they lose health care. It's a pay cut. And so I'm working on changing that. So we created a succession plan. This plan outlines courses that we want every rank in our organization to strive to obtain. And it's usually the courses for the next level of government, next level of promotion. I have a battalion chief right now that I just went to and said, I need you to go staff and command. You have no executive level training. I want you to go staff and command this time. And he's like, yeah, I'm ready. Let's go. Let's sign up. So we got his thing in. But even down to the firefighter, okay? We want you getting your fire officer 1, fire officer 2, your instructor 1. If you think you want to be a captain, we'll send you on to fire officer 3. Okay? We'll do it on duty. We'll pay you to do it. We're going to pay you overtime. Talks about developing a comprehensive communication plan. One of the things that many chiefs hear is you're not communicating enough. We don't know what's going on in the department. So when I got to Portage, I developed what I classify as a comprehensive communications plan. Once a month, I meet with all 3 shifts via Microsoft Teams. I make all the division chiefs be on it. The director now participates, myself, and all 3 shifts. Every station, the station captain has to give a report. What's going on with that station? Are there any pressing needs? Where are they at with fire inspections? Training, we got hose testing, pump testing, rig needs this, rig needs that. It's a communication key. Then all of my division chiefs get a spiel on what they've got coming up for the month. So the training chief now gets on and basically says, hey, this week we're doing this week, and the next week we're doing this. We have our EMS training the following week. They have an update on what's coming up for the entire month. Then I give whatever information out that I can, talking about new hires, if we're able to get a new hire on board, a new on-call, whatever. We always end it with, does anyone have any questions for anyone that's on this call? It can be a question for me. It can be a question for the director. It can be a question for any one of the division chiefs. Shoot, they've asked each other questions before, just a joke, and make each other look bad. Okay? But at least I've got them talking. All right? It's a communication piece. I also have a meeting where once a month I call it my battalion chief work group. All the battalion chiefs and myself and the division chiefs get together. What is it that we're seeing? What do we need to fix? What do we need to work on? What needs to get better? Who's going to do what? We've implemented a new incident command policy this way where everyone has buy-in to this. This isn't me telling you we're operating this way. This is the collective working on change, positive change for the department. So that's part of our comprehensive communications plan. I did do, when I got there, I developed the fire apparatus and vehicle replacement plans, saving the city over $3.5 million over 10 years in the CIP budget. I'm a little kind of, I talked about this in my first interview. My oldest rig, and it's a reserve rig, is 7 years old. We took delivery of 2 new 2021s last year. Portage was in the same they got themselves in trouble by putting off replacing apparatus, and so they bought a bunch all at once. And so now we're in a good position, but I've got a 7-year-old reserve apparatus, and for the firefighters in the room, I think that'd be unheard of across the state of Michigan, right? It's a good problem to have, but being fiscally responsible, I can't justify that. I just can't. So what I did, I went into the CIP program. I pushed back some of our next purchases. Not a lot, but now the plan calls for at the 10-year mark, an engine will go into reserve status. By the 13-year mark, we're replacing it. That's an engine. For our aerials, by the 17-year mark, it's going into reserve status. By the 22-year mark, it's gone. Okay? I'm getting rid of our 25-year-old E1 as soon as I can get this new aerial platform in, which is 18 to 20 months right now, Pierce is saying, as soon as I can get the contract approved by City Council. That'll be, again, my oldest rig is 7 years old. I'll have a 2017 107-footer and straight stick, and then this aerial platform. Again, it's asking for what you need, justifying that need, and not over-asking, okay? That's when community leaders, that's when city leaders start saying, well, you really didn't need that. What do you really need, okay? So by doing that, I created some goodwill right away in my job with the city leaders. So then when I went and asked for other things in the budget, in the general fund budget, they gave it to me. To include, this year I asked for 6 full-time equivalents, and I got 3, okay, which I'll take, and I'm going to ask for 6 again next year. I didn't just walk in and say, hey, I want 6 more bodies, okay? It was a 5-page memo articulating history of the department, which I wasn't part of, but I researched and got, and then articulating where we were going with that, okay, why we needed that. A 1970, don't hold me to this, but it was like in the 1970s, 74 maybe, study was done when they had a few bad fires in Portage, and there was very little staffing, and the city council established a minimum staffing of 7, okay? I'm still operating with that minimum staffing today. How many years later? 30, 50 years later? Okay? That hasn't gone up. In 1974, they were running 800 calls a year. Last year, we ran 4,800. We're on pace to hit 5,100 this year. Our calls for service are up 10% in Portage this year alone. It's the articulation. Where are we going? Why do we need to invest now before we get so far behind that we're in catch-up mode? Okay. Yeah, I think we're good there. So moving on to professional development, I've done a lot of the things that most fire chiefs have done. I've got my Fire Officer 1, 2, and 3. I'm an NFPA certified fire plan reviewer. I'm an NFPA certified fire inspector 2. Full disclosure, I didn't get my instructor 1 because I was grandfathered before Public Act 291 took place last October. And I never really had the inclination of doing training. I was kind of an operations guy, but there's value in it. I do see that, but I don't have my fire instructor 1. In 2017, I did graduate from the Executive Fire Officer Program, National Fire Academy. I'm one of 2 people at KDPS that ever went and did that. The other one's still working. Assistant Chief Tibbetts got his shortly around the same time. For those of you that aren't familiar with that program, you go 2 weeks every year for 4 years, and you attend 4 different classes. In between those years, you have to write, they've changed it now, but they used to be you had to write a master's level thesis each time. So we're talking papers that are anywhere from 60 to 100 pages long. The topics you choose are ones that are relevant to your department. So I talked about succession planning 1 year. I talked about quality control procedures for NIFRS reporting. Social media during natural disasters was not a real good paper, I'll readily admit. I don't know if I put the full effort into that one. But the one that I was most proud of is that determining future fire station needs for the city of Kalamazoo. So if some of you recall the 2015 facility study that I think is being repeated right now, right? You noticed how they did maps and they shaded response times and areas like that? Okay, I replicated a study similar to that for the city of Kalamazoo. That is being utilized right now for discussions on adding an additional station out west where they are looking at the most growth. And we did that by looking at building permits, demolition permits, calls for service at that particular time, projected calls for service in 10 to 20 years. And we identified the areas in which we felt we were going to need station coverage. I examined, do we build a brand new station and just add on? Do we move a station further west so that we can get coverage in both areas? And so a lot of those questions were answered in that paper, and I just talked to Assistant Chief Tibbetts the other day about it, and they're still looking at that study and utilizing it. So, and then I went to multiple leadership schools that were on the police side that I won't go into other than the one, which is most notable, the PERF, or Police Executive Research Forum, Senior Management Institute of Policing. It's one of the top 3 police executive schools that you can go to. It's at Boston College. It's a 3-week course out there. So that was real quick, and I'm burning through my time. So I'm going to try to get through real quick what the first 12 months, because everyone's tired. When I was at Portage, I actually did my first 100 days plan. Okay, so I'm going to start with that. And these aren't in any particular order here. So I don't want, well, you know, he's going to put reading policies in front of meeting with the union board. No, that's not the case, okay? There's several things that are more pressing than others. I did not put them in order here. But number one, besides, I'm going to start emulating that community first right from the beginning. Number 2 is coming in from the outside, being that public safety guy. I want to learn Battle Creek Fire. I want to learn how you respond. I want to know how you deploy. I want to read your contracts. I need to read your policies. I need to understand civil service and how that affects promotional and hiring. It's understanding how the department operates. We are not in decision-making mode the very first month. I don't want to come in and make huge, wide changes in the first month without fully understanding what the ramifications of those changes are. I do understand that there might be an outstanding grievance or an outstanding issue that may need to get addressed quicker rather than later, and so those might get a priority. But I wouldn't expect anything really drastic in those first 100 days. So as with any new job, you want to get what your expectations of your boss are. I think that's pretty standard. I met with the union board when I was at Portage and basically gave him the spiel that I gave you tonight about public safety, because they were just as concerned. They thought, oh, he's bringing you in because you got public safety background and you're gonna change the way we operate and you want to push us to public safety. You know, that's not necessarily the case. I told a group today of firefighters, I said, I have sat in front of Gary, Indiana. They've come to us, by the way. There was a Cedar Falls, Iowa, that was looking at public safety before Iowa outlawed or banned by state law that you can't have public safety departments in Iowa. We had departments from over in the United Kingdom coming over and looking at our public safety model. You know, and so we've had these discussions, or I've been part of these discussions where we talk about public safety. We talk about the difficulties and changeover. I told the group today, KDPS is a darn good department right now. They are. I'd put them up against anyone, okay? But it wasn't always like that. They went through a lot of trials and tribulations starting back in 1984 when they made that switch. Even 12 years later, when I hired on, we were still going through that transition. And I readily admit that there were training issues, there were fighting fire issues, there were EMS quality control issues. But slowly they have gone from being a police department that does firefighting to a combination department that's pretty darn good at both disciplines. But what I'll tell you is that it's going to take a long time. And I'm not necessarily an advocate for or against it. That's a decision that is made at the political level. Yes, I'll have input as your fire chief, but if you understand, that's a political item that decision gets made. And I told the group this today also, 3 weeks from today, I actually lose. My police certification will expire. September 14th is my 2-year mark of not being employed by a law enforcement agency, and I will no longer have my law enforcement certification unless I go back to school to renew it. So, and at this point I have no intentions of doing that unless circumstances change in the future. I do, though, bring some expertise on the public safety side. So if there's efficiencies that can be developed, well, you know, maybe it's not fully going public safety, but maybe it's efficiency with administration or support services or training where we can bolster those areas by combining forces, then I do have some expertise in that. And I think I have a lot that I can offer in that realm. I want to meet with the personnel at stations. I think it's important that I get out there and you learn as much about me as I'm going to try to learn about you. Understand that while I'm here to try to get you everything you need, I can't say yes to everything, so we do have to sometimes tell you no. It doesn't mean that we can't revisit it. It just means right now it's a no. And I'll give you a reason why. And you can come in and argue with me. I tell all my battalion chiefs that door is always open. I've told my captains, I've told my fires, that my door is always open. You just have to agree to hear the words no and my understanding of why I'm saying no, and we got to agree to find a different way of doing it. If I put something in place that you don't agree with, give it a try. Okay? I'm not here to intentionally violate anyone's contract, but you know, if we want to try something, I'm a big enough guy to say, hey, you know, that's not working after a few months. Maybe we need to tweak it. Maybe we need to just abandon it and go back to the way we were doing it. But how do you ever improve if you're not willing to try new ways of thinking, new ways of doing? And so, yeah, I've told the Portage guys no a lot. And I'm sure some of them are watching right now, and they're all probably saying that's true. But I've also said yes in a lot of circumstances, and they've benefited from a lot of the things that we've been able to get them. One of the things that I think gets skipped a lot is reviewing legal mandates. And I just want to touch on this, and I apologize if I'm running over. As a new chief, you have to be able to speak to these things that legally you're mandated to do. Respiratory protection program, you know, the bloodborne pathogens program. More importantly, I heard today about turnout gear, and a lot of the gear's nearing expiration, and that could be coming to a head, okay? So we got to evaluate. We got to see where we're at, who's going to expire when, how long is it going to take to get gear, how can we budget for it, and we approach that problem before it becomes a crisis, okay? We do this by reviewing these legal mandates. Where are we at with these items, okay? Any fire chief that doesn't come in and review this is just setting themselves up for trouble down the road. So we need to do that review. We did that review in Portage when I first took over. So that's kind of my first 100 days. So my first 12 months, let's talk first 12 months. Normally I'd say, yeah, there's a plan in place. I got some good ideas for the first 12 months. But we got a problem here in Battle Creek with saying that. And the problem is you have two big studies out there, if I'm not mistaken. One's a facility study, and the other is the police, fire, and EMS study that's out there. As a fire chief new coming in, to lay out a plan before those studies come out is foolish. You could lay out the best intention plans, and if that study says you should do the complete opposite, how am I going to sell it to you that now we got to stop what we're doing and then go back this direction? So when I say it's kind of a unique situation, it is because of these studies. But what we can do is in the first 12 months when we get these studies is we have to partner both internally and with our external stakeholders to start reviewing these studies, developing a game plan with the recommendations, choosing to accept some of those recommendations, and then developing a game plan on how we can make some of this happen. Okay, so also what we have to do during the first 12 months. I think these studies are going to challenge our organizational structure, or the Battle Creek Fire Department's organizational structure. What does that look like? If you're telling me we have to build 2 new stations and I'm the only administrator that is going to be responsible for that, that's a difficulty. So we have to discuss what that administrative organizational structure looks like. And that's going to involve, I realize that, conversations with the union and how we can make that happen. When I say evaluate our deployment model, that's me getting to know your deployment model. I don't, I'm not coming in and saying I'm going to move you to 2-man engines. I'm not saying I'm going to move you to 4-person engines. I'm just saying we have to evaluate, everything's got to be on the table and to provide the best protection to the community, because that's what it's about. It's about the community first and providing the best service we can to the community. Again, I said we'd implement the communications plan. I do think it's important that given the size of this department that we need to evaluate the capacity of the training officer and the fire marshal to do the things we're asking them to do. And there's plenty of ideas on how we can create capacity that way. It doesn't necessarily mean we add positions in those areas, but we have to get creative and look at different ways that we can make sure that we're getting the training we need, and then we're also implementing some fire prevention stuff through the fire marshal's office, through code enforcement and the like. Evaluation of fleet and development of future replacement plan is a no-brainer.
Hey, Jeff, I'm gonna stop.
Yeah, we're going to cut me off. Sorry, I won't go into strategic planning. So.
Thanks. I want to get into Q&A, and we did start a little bit later, so bear with
Yep.
us. But Ted's going to pass the microphone. So questions that you have for Jeff, please let us know so Ted can get to the microphone. We use the microphone because we're streaming and recording, and without it, we can't necessarily hear all of that.
All right. Questions? Right here. Thank you. I was going to ask you the same questions that I asked the previous candidate, but I think you've explained a lot about your background, and you've been very forthcoming relative to where you have come from and where you are now. But I think there is a definite concern in the audience here relative to public safety, and there's a history of a lack of effective leadership in the fire department over the course of the last couple of decades in this fire department. How would you get the trust of these people out here that you're going to be there for the interests of the city and for them, and not just abandon them for your own moving up?
So I'm assuming when you say moving up, maybe moving to a different fire chief's job someplace else. So all I can do is ask you to trust me and let my actions speak volumes, okay? And what I mean by that is this. I am not naive enough to think that every single fireman or every single community leader is going to trust me and trust that I don't have some predisposed notion that we're going public safety. What I can do is I'll point to the last 15 months of service at Portage. Same fears, same questions. You're coming in to do public safety. You know how many times we've talked about public safety? 0. Not once have we talked about cross-training. Not once. The director doesn't want to do it. I don't want to do it. City Hall isn't making mention of it. My sole goal at Portage, and you can I encourage you to talk to them, is, like I said, I'm trying to make it just a little bit better there. I've had my career. I've had my time, fun, and hauling hose and fighting fire, and that was a great career. But now I'm in it to make places just a little bit better. And I tackle that through one problem at a time. And yeah, there's problems here. I get that. Infrastructure problems, organizational depth and capacity problems that need to be addressed. But I've shown in Portage that I'm willing to do that. I've shown in KDPS that we're willing to do that. I don't know how I can show my passion for the fire side any more than that. And I just ask that they trust me. And that's a huge leap of faith, but at the same time, they need to make sure that I can trust them as well, because it's going to be a give and take, and it's got to be a collaboration. And yeah, so the same thing as you said, that maybe the union's difficult to work with. Okay, well, I'm trusting that Jason, when he talked to me on the interview, that they're willing to make those strides. And when I had conversations today with some of the firefighters, they're willing to make those strides. So I'm assuming that it's a two-way street. I'm hoping it's a two-way street for that. I'm not leaving this area. And, so someone asked, why the fire chief of Battle Creek? Okay? You saw my 16-year-old, almost 17-year-old kid. I'm not leaving the area until he figures out what he wants to do for college, and if he's in the, and where he goes, and I try to get him through. That was the whole reason I went to Portage. The only reason I left KDPS so quickly is because I had that opportunity at Portage. If I had to go looking elsewhere, I would have needed to find something that is local. And I didn't put in for the Ashtamole fire job, and that is in my backyard. I didn't put in for that fire chief's job. This is a natural progression from Portage. And when I say natural progression, twice the size, 2.5 times the budget, okay? It's a step up, yes. But if you're asking me, am I going to go to Grand Rapids next? I don't have that inclination, right? And so my family's keeping me here. I think this is a good transition to the next step for my personal career. And, hopefully it ends here. So I think did I answer all of your questions? Okay.
I have a question. Do you have any experience with the deaf community in Kalamazoo, or if someone who is deaf has a complaint? Like, I know in Kalamazoo they have a lot more accessibility for the deaf compared to Battle Creek. I'm wondering, what is your experience with the deaf community in Battle Creek, with the fire departments? How do they have access within the community? And then also the same question about the fire alarm in my house. We received a box with a wire for the fire alarm, but we can't install it. We had to hire someone to come in. We need help in this deaf community to have our homes safe.
Okay, so to answer your first question about resources for the deaf, Disability Resources Network in Kalamazoo is who we partnered with, and I can't say I did it from a fire department perspective, but I did it from an emergency management, how we communicate during times of natural disaster or that. With regards to the box in your home, I'm not familiar with what you have. And
Not like a box, but like the fire alarm, the flash, with the wire, this connector. You have to hire an electrician to plug in our own fire. So I'm stuck, and we don't know what to do. We can't afford to hire an electrician. Like, the fire chief gave me the box. I work at Deaf Link, and they have the fire alarm. They gave me the box with the wire, but I don't have any means to. Who's gonna install that?
so if I was the fire chief and you came to me with this problem, I would at least try to make a few phone calls. I don't quite understand what exactly you're talking about in terms of the box, but it sounds like you need an electrician to hook it up.
With the wire, you know, if there's an emergency, those will be lines out.
Mhm. So you need electrical to it, low voltage.
It's very complicated, and it's, you have to hire somebody to install it.
We would try to help you get the resources you need to do that. Okay, good. Anything else?
Hi, thanks again for coming. Kind of have a question and a statement. I appreciate your honesty about the incident with the African-American male and being forthcoming with that piece. I guess my question is, and I understand the growth and not trying to hold you into a position, but from my experience and knowing that still climbing the ladder when situations happen like that speaks a lot also to privilege in spaces. So my question to you is on the realms of diversity. How do you feel about diversity? What are your plans for diversity when it comes to the fire department?
Yeah, so great question. Great question. You know, this might sound like an excuse, but my incident that I talked about at the beginning of this, I don't think that had anything to do with race or anything like that. That was, you know, I got spit in the face and it was a knee-jerk reaction. Okay, it was wrong. When you talk about diversity, obviously it's important that departments reflect that. I will tell you, it's very difficult, especially on the police side, because no one wants to be a police officer right now. You know, I talked a little bit about recruiting those 10-year-olds. You know, that's an important piece. I think diversity is something that you have to work on nonstop. And it could be an interaction that takes place 10 years earlier that makes those two kids, or maybe one of those kids, I want to be a Portage firefighter. So that's one component of developing that base. And then you heard me talk about how we, when recruiting at KDPS, had to broaden our base so that we could capture more qualified individuals. We were missing out on qualified minorities because they didn't have simple access to how to create a resume, or maybe a computer to create the resume on. Maybe they knew how to do it and they needed the access to the computer. So we identified that as a problem and we helped create a solution. Is it the perfect solution? No, but we're taking those steps to do that. I think when you talk, and I realize civil service is involved and the difficulties with that, I really do. I think when you're talking about diversity and hiring, the biggest thing you can do is try to create as big of a candidate pool that are qualified as possible. And it's not that you're showing favoritism to one group, you're just equaling the playing field by giving them access to resources such as interviewing techniques and resumes. And so they can shine in an interview, right? Well, a lot of people don't have access to it, of all races. And so I highlighted the Northside Ministerial Alliance, which is predominantly African American, but it was open to everyone. Any recruiting event we went to like that, we had workforce solutions with us. I was just highlighting that one. So from a standpoint of diversity, your hiring practices are what have to pull you through. Now, with that said, I'm sitting before you, and in my 33 full-time members at Portage, I have one female. Okay? All the rest are white males. When I started as the deputy fire chief, we were all white males. Diversity was an immediate, it was on my 100-day list. It was at the top of my list to talk to with HR. Different from KDPS, Portage has HR do all the recruiting, all the hiring, I get sent an calendar invite for the final interview with the initials of it. I don't even get to know the name until I walk through the door. And I tried to meet with the human resources director and say, hey, I've got this experience from KDPS. I really want us to try to recruit, you know, a more diverse candidate field. And, you know, and we're trying. So behind the scenes, I have my community risk reduction manager, who everyone has one in the department, who knows everyone, right? Is always on the phone. All right, he's my guy. So whenever we have an opening, and it's not a lot, but when we have openings, he's doing my active recruiting for me behind the scenes. I'm very proud of the fact that in my first hiring group, I was able to hire a female, okay? It is something that the department needed. She's well qualified. She's doing an outstanding job. She just finished her 4 weeks of training, and she's phenomenal. And not only is she keeping up, she's making the others keep up with her. So it's a good breath of fresh air. But yeah, you have follow-up?
Just a quick follow-up. What type of groundwork did you lay inside of the department before you hired her? So what discussions did you have internally introducing a female into the ranks of all males?
Yeah, so the first thing I had to do was, as probably in a lot of cases, we do have separate male-female dorms in all of our, well, 2 of our 3 stations. The newest station that just got built are the individual rooms. But as with anything, you know, because it's not being utilized, we don't have any females. That tends then to get taken over by. So I sent out the edict that effective immediately were to vacate the female locker rooms, period. And then, you know, and I got a little bit of pushback, not a lot, but, well, she's not assigned to this station. I don't care. She might come in on emergency recall and she shouldn't have to move some guy's stuff because they decide to sleep in the female locker room tonight. So that was one thing that I had to do. I had a discussion with the battalion chiefs. Not that I had to, because I don't think we have that issue. You know, maybe I'm a little blind to it, but I would like to think that we don't have that issue. Okay, well, yeah. I met with the battalion chiefs and said, if there is anything, we need to nip it in the butt. I don't care if she's present. I don't care if the statement's made and she can't hear it. It's not going to get back to her. I want it stopped. I want it stopped now, and I want it addressed. And so those are the 2 things that I really did. And knock on wood, hopefully, you know, I won't have to address any issues, but I will if I need to.
Any other questions over here?
How do you feel about advancing like our fire department from MFR level to ALS fire with circumstances with EMS across the country right now?
Yeah, great question. It's not a short answer for that one, so I'm going to go into it. Cut me off if you're tired of listening. But I discussed this with Life Care today. Full disclosure, last year we were having issues with our ambulance provider in Portage, and we were scheduled to put on a presentation before the City Council during their December retreat to propose hiring 23 additional firefighters and providing 4 ALS transport ambulances 24/7. Circumstances happen, and when I say circumstances, politics come into play, and we got shut down the week before. Okay? Now, in that discussion, the biggest thing you have to consider is payer mix. Okay? There's a different payer mix in Battle Creek than there is Portage. Okay? Portage was able to do it based on our projections. It would be an initial investment. This was before prices went through the roof on ambulances and everything else. but it was going to be an initial investment of about $3.5 to $4 million for ambulances. It would probably be another investment of the first year's wages for the 23 individuals that we were going to hire. But we felt, based on the statistics that Acumed was giving us on our payer mix for Portage, and based on our call volume that was projected, that we would be revenue neutral for the 23 additional bodies that we were going to put on by year 2. And then in addition to that, we had it set up so we had a replacement schedule for our ambulances. And we believed, okay, now I couldn't say with any certainty, because until you get into that business and there's all the nuances, and I'm sure Life Care could tell you all the reasons why I'm wrong. But we believed, based on all the studies and stats that we had, that we would be revenue neutral. We thought that was going to be a win for the city of Portage. 23 additional bodies that are also available for firefighting the few times. I mean, we only have a handful of fires a year, okay? You know, just like you, we run about 75%, 76% medicals. And so we're a very EMS-dominated thing. So when you ask me my thoughts, I think it is dependent upon the circumstances of the municipality that we're dealing with. Can we go at ALS? Well, sure, you can go ALS. It's going to cost more here, in my opinion, based on my limited knowledge of all this and what we put together in Portage. Okay? But you could do it. I don't think that with the other pressing needs that are here that rises to the top of the priority list. I think there's other things we can try within the EMS world to try to make some corrections, try to improve response times, try to help out, be that partner to, again, remember, it's community first, right? I realize they're a private ALS contractor, but we're also we're all interested in serving the community, and that's what's got to be first. And so when you ask me my thoughts, I'm all for it if the money's there, but I think we'd all agree that there's more pressing needs right now. So does that answer your question? Okay.
We can do one more question. Did you have one, Commissioner? I do. Okay.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
So as a city, we've committed to the value of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Mm-hmm.
And diversity, I heard you talk a lot about, which is really about data and statistics and how we're recruiting potentially to expand what our force looks like. But inclusivity is about the culture that exists. And I'd like you to speak to what you would do to create a culture of inclusiveness within the fire department. Not suggesting it doesn't exist now, but what would you as a leader do to make sure that that happens, so that if you are successful in recruiting a more diverse firefighting team, what does it look like inside to make sure that that's actually successful?
Right. So good question. Yeah, so it's about, once you get them in the door, it's about retaining them, right? So the first thing you can do, and I'm really kind of referring back, I think MGT did a consultant study for Battle Creek, and it got presented in June. Oh, I'm sorry, I'll step over here. I agree 100% with some of their findings, okay? The harassment, discrimination policies have to be strong, they have to be in place, they have to have ramifications if they're violated, okay? And it sounded like the fire department, if I read it correctly, had a pretty decent policy in place. So that's one, okay? So it's establishing that expectation through a policy, that's one. But two, I think you have to live it, okay? For example, when I started in the fire service, it was NASCAR and hunting, okay? And if you didn't do one of those two things, you were hard-pressed to have a conversation with a lot of the individuals in our department, okay? Firefighters and the younger generation are so much broader in what their likes and wants and desires are. So it's about making sure that all those different attributes are welcome in the firehouse, okay? How do you do that? So I can tell you what we've done in Portage, all right? In Portage, we've tried to have, once a year what we call our family annual picnic, okay? It's in conjunction with Fire Prevention Week. We have our open house to kick it off, and this year it's, I think, the 8th of October is the Saturday. And then all the shifts come into our Station 1. All the families are welcome. They bring a plate to pass, and it's just fellowship for a couple hours. And everyone is, I mean, so in our first year, last year when we did it, counting the 10 that were on the shift, I think we had almost 2/3 of the remaining 20 families were there. And it's about building that family, right? And when I say building a family, I mean you have to include everyone. But it's also a family, so families don't get along all the time. So you got to make sure that you kind of monitor that and make sure that things don't get out of control that way either, right? So you have to build that culture that values everyone in the organization. Even that, for lack of a better terms, the guy or gal that just doesn't necessarily fit in. You have to find a way to include them. So activities such as that family picnic do that, because we get together for fellowship and you know, you get an understanding of what they like, what their habits are, and there's that dialogue, right? And a lot of the misunderstandings there are typically communication-based. So when you can increase that dialogue, you create an understanding and an acceptance of everyone's beliefs. You know, and so it's about making everyone feel welcome, in my opinion, and trying to create that atmosphere.
All right. I think we had our last question, so thank you, Commissioner. Let's thank Jeff for coming, and then I will give you like next steps. For those of you who did not pick up kind of a feedback form and you prefer electronics, there's a QR code. We just want to get the feedback from everybody who's participated. So if you're watching live stream or the recording, please know that that's available, but you can also get that information on the city's website. We're trying to get the feedback through Friday at 5 o'clock. And then I just want to thank Matt Beauchamp and Jason Tack for being part of our interview team. It's been a journey that's not complete yet, but I've appreciated all that input, and we will use that for the next steps. So that's really what we want, is feedback now, and then that group will get back together again to talk about that feedback and next steps. Yes, sir.
Where do we turn this form in?
There's a box.
No, we don't do it tonight.
Oh, you can, you can always bring them to City Hall, or you can convert it to an electronic medium if you'd like. However, we can make it easier for you. City Hall, you can go to my office, yes. Any other questions for me? Thank you so much for being a part of this evening. We appreciate it. Thank you, commissioners, fire personnel, Steve Frisbee, and others. Have a good evening, and watch for next steps to come out.